everyone!
Hey, I'm Yarrow from Gender Spectrum. My pronouns are they, them.
And I'm Jenna. I'm also with Gender Spectrum. My pronouns are they or she. And we are doing our first monthly Instagram Live Q&A session. So we're going to hang for a few minutes while people join.
Yeah. We're just excited. It's February. So it's Black History Month. Very excited about it. And today is actually the birthday of Audre Lorde, who is an author, incredible author. I don't know if y'all have checked out Audre Lorde, but if you haven't, do. And yeah, it's just a good month of celebrating Black excellence. I myself have been following a lot of Black Instagram pages and getting a lot of updates and like historical information, and it's been really awesome.
Yay! Well, welcome everyone that just joined. This is kind of an open Q&A session. We wanted to have a space for you all to be able to ask questions, for us to we were calling it like our living room office hours. So just a chance to like chat about gender and have a safe space if folks need resources or kind of want to ask questions about navigating their own gender or supporting someone who's navigating gender. Shout out to my dad. I saw that he just joined.
Hi,
so if y'all have questions, please just put them in the comments. We are still trying to perfect our like multitasking of questions and things coming in while we are talking at the same time. So just put them in the comments if you have questions. We wanted to start though by talking a little bit about Dwayne Wade.
Yeah.
And kind of start with some like current events, and then hopefully maybe that'll prompt questions or comments from you all to chat about.
Yeah. So we were really excited to see that Dwayne Wade has kind of been doing kind of a media tour in support of his daughter, who is trans, and it's just awesome to see somebody that has that much of a platform speak about their child and support their child and not kind of question their child's identity, and just really just be in support of and advocate for trans youth. So I was just super happy to like read about that, and it's not only him, it's also his whole family, but also Gabrielle Union, his wife, and they're just great parents. I think it's nice to see that.
Yeah, we were also talking a little bit about how like it's really cool to have support from like a sports community kind of figure. I think like sports can be so gendered. And I think, we work with a lot of families where dads take a little bit longer sometimes to come around to supporting their gender expansive kid. And so I think like the combination of those things is really cool to see on such a high visibility of kind of what that can look like. And
yeah.
Just nice. And it's nice to have like positive moments. I think a lot of times often topics around gender can be really heavy and difficult, and it's just kind of nice sometimes to have things that are uplifting and fun.
Yeah, no, I think it's been really awesome, and I'm actually excited to see kind of like what the support of their daughter ends up looking like. Like is this gonna like lead to a foundation? Is this gonna lead to a change in sports regulations? Is this gonna because I don't know that much about his daughter, but I'm wondering like, is she herself an athlete? What is that gonna look like, right? Because that's something that we talk about a lot, is like what collegiate sports that are separated in a binary gender way, like what does that mean for trans athletes? So I'd be interested to see if there's like any intersections there.
Yeah. All right, so if you just joined, if you have any questions, feel free to send them in. I see there are no questions so far, but that's okay because we have a lot in our back pocket. But if you have questions or comments or things you want to share about gender or questions about resources, we are here to support with that.
Yeah.
So I guess we can start with a couple things I know we wanted to talk about, and we can kind of jump in if questions come in at that point. But one of the things we talk a lot about at Gender Spectrum, and I think is super important for youth to have kind of a framework around, is this concept that like you don't have to have all of your gender 100% figured out and beautifully articulated
right.
to be valid in your experience.
Right.
And I think that's super important, not only for youth to hear, but also for adults who are trying to create affirming spaces for young people. I think there's often this pressure to feel like you have to like beautifully articulate what your gender is, that your gender can't shift or change over time, and that if someone like asks you a question and you can't perfectly answer it, that the pronouns you want to use aren't valid, your experience isn't valid. And I think that's just such an important thing for young people to hear, and for people who are supporting young people to kind of to know as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I think it's absolutely valid to change your pronouns, to change your name, to not want to use any pronouns. I mean, there's just so many ways to identify, and there's no right or wrong way to gender, right? To each their own. And I think it's just important also to, I was just talking to my friend Mateo the other day, and I was just like, hey, just checking in, like, your pronouns have been they, them until now, but just checking in, like just wondering if that's maybe changed for you. And they were like, wow, yeah, actually, thank you so much for asking. And I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, I'm also gonna go by he, him. So either would be fine. And I think even just creating moments for each other, just bringing it into conversation and normalizing it, is so important. Like, sometimes when I'm talking to people and they're talking about people that they don't really know that well, it might be just a coworker or somebody that works at a cafe that they frequent, and they're like, oh, like, yeah, she said this. And I'm like, oh, like, so you've asked her if those are her pronouns? And they're like, well, no, but I mean, like, she's a girl. And I'm like, well, you don't actually, like, if you've never had that conversation, if you've actually never asked that person, you actually don't know that. And I think that that's part of, like, normalizing the conversations around gender, and, like, normalizing different pronouns, is, like, not making that assumption. If you haven't actually directly asked somebody something, you actually don't know, right? There's so much that we assume by looking at somebody that isn't actually factual. It's actually just, like, assumptions that we're making.
Yeah. I know. I think that happens so often. I was at a training recently and was super excited because they had pronouns, like, on the name tags to write your pronouns in. And so I, like, get to the training. I'm thinking, like, oh, my gosh, this is such a great sign. Like, I'm going to feel safe in this space. And then, like, no one put their pronouns on the name tag.
Yeah.
And I started looking around and kind of making these connections that I think most cisgender folks in the room felt like how they're perceived, someone's going to look at them and choose the correct pronouns for them. And so often that's not the experience of trans or non-binary people. And I, like, very quickly felt kind of isolated because I realized, like, I was one of the few people who put my pronouns on there.
Right.
And I think that goes back to exactly what you're saying of, like, making it just way more a part of the conversation to ask those questions and to, like, normalize that conversation, so that if you maybe are someone who uses pronouns that maybe someone's not going to assume or know from looking at you, like, you're not the only one that participated in that.
Absolutely. Because it also then comes back to, like, this sense of being othered. Like, oh, well, if you don't have the normal pronouns, then please put them on your name tag. It's like, there's no normal pronouns. Like, that's not real. That's actually not real life.
I love that you checked in with your friend about pronouns, because I think this piece around, like, having to have it all figured out, also there's, like, this second layer of nothing can change. Like, you get one chance. You get one chance to state who you are, the way you want to be addressed, the gender expression that you want to have, and that, like, that's the only time that can happen. And that it can become, I think, really hard to, like, tell people if that's shifted if someone doesn't ask you.
Totally.
Or, like, create that space for you to kind of have that conversation.
Yeah.
I saw someone recently that I'm friends with, like, post something on Facebook saying, like, hey, heads up everyone, like I use they and she pronouns, but I've noticed that most people are using she, can like I just remind y'all to still use they for me. And I thought that was like such a cool way to be like just kind of like checking in with yourself about what you need and what you want, and then finding a way to like communicate that out to other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think the assumption is always that like these things don't shift over time.
Right.
Or that there's no place to really explore or figure things out.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. I also realized that, like, I used to go by they, them, and she, her, and stopped because I just felt like people just thought, oh, well, I'm just going to, like, use these tradition, like, I don't even know.
She.
Yeah. And I was just like, no, we're not going to do that. So that's now off the table. So now you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
But I just, it's just
but
so...
it sucks because it's like...
Right, because I did actually genuinely want to use both.
Yeah.
Now I feel like I'm in the they, them zone, but like...
Yeah. And it's like how much of these decisions about gender are like for other people, and then how much of them are like for us ourselves and what we really want.
Yeah. I also love when people go, let's say, by like they, them, and he, him, or they, them, and she, her, and then in my sentence I try to incorporate both.
Yeah.
Like,
I think that's great.
I think that's, and I love like when it's folks that like I'll be like around my parents or something and they're like, what? Hold on.
Who are you talking about?
Wait a minute. And it's like, no, you need to get with the program.
Okay, we got our first question. They said, hi, I'm Lee from Korea. Thank you for joining. And I am genderqueer. My question is, how are kids in the U.S. learning about gender spectrum? Like the organization or the concept of gender as a spectrum?
I guess we can answer like the organization. So we've been around for about 11 years now. And so a lot of it is word of mouth, but we also have so many incredible staff members here that are working in almost every sector of business. Like, we have folks doing like more corporate stuff. We have folks working on like laws. We have folks doing educational things and coming up with different like practices. We come out with a lot of like PDF kind of
different resources. We do work with families who are supporting like a loved one who's gender expansive, work particularly with youth. We do a lot of like social media posts, and then we have every single year a conference, and people come from, I would say, around the world to attend the conference. There's about 1,000 attendees over the 2 days, and there tends to be a lot. There's also, I just feel like we just like, if you like Google gender or anything, we come up. And I think that there's a lot of our literature out there and a lot of our like thought. I think also there's like a lot more parents now who are really wanting to support their kids, and like thankfully are really trying to seek out resources and support their kids at a younger age. And so a lot of the work that we do is with families who maybe email us because they don't have support in their community, or they're scared or overwhelmed and kind of don't know what their first step should be. So I feel like that's kind of how people hear about us. And I think as like a larger conversation about gender as a spectrum, I think like the internet and social media for young people, they are like so ahead of the conversations that even our age is having around gender. And I think we're going to be in this place of like catch up, because they are just like so much further ahead in terms of like how they're thinking about gender and the conversations they have with their peers and the amount of like terms they use for their different like gender identities that they hold. I think that we're going to be learning a lot from this next kind of generation of young people.
Definitely.
Any other questions that folks have? Things they want info on? I'm happy to see some of our friends are joining.
Yeah, hi friends.
Earlier I was saying a shout out to my dad. I think my dad's tuning in. He just retired, so and just got an Instagram. it's really hard to read because
Yeah.
you have to like
okay.
squint and look at it. Okay, since it's Black History Month, who's a Black person in the LGBTQ community that inspires you or that you look up to? That's a really sweet question.
Yeah.
Is that your friend?
That's my friend. Hi, friend. So many, first of all. I want to shout out Madden from Project Q. That is, Madden, like, super inspires me, is just such a kind and generous person, and is also one of the busiest people I've ever met. Like, they're so incredible, and so everybody wants to work, like, for them, with them, and yet they, like, carve out time for, like, folks in their community, and, like, have always come through when I've needed, like, resources or, like, support of any kind. Like, they seriously outdo themselves every time in just holding space and
do you want to do a quick plug for what they do?
Information. Yeah, so you want to? Yeah, so Project Q, they're based in LA, and they do haircuts. So they have a mobile haircutting station. It's like this really cool, like, retro swaggy, like, Airstream kind of a thing, and then they also have a shop, like a physical location, but they're really dope. And what is their Instagram handle?
You can just look them up. Project Q, project with a Q at the end. Madden Lopez.
Yeah.
They do such incredible work and have been super generous with their time to support some of the young people that we work with.
Yeah.
Have done really awesome haircuts at our conference the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Okay, someone else said, I keep forgetting that we can read it here. Hi friends, I recently came out as queer to my family. What are your suggestions for someone coming out as genderqueer to their conservative Christian family? Yeah, this is so real. One thing I would love to plug is that we have a bunch of resources on our website that are specifically around kind of gender, queer identity, and faith. Austin Hartkey, you can look him up. He worked with us at Gender Spectrum for a while, specifically on like really creating resources to connect, talking about gender and sexual orientation and family and like faith as like a core intersection within that. So I would definitely recommend reaching out to him. He has a ton of contacts and connections, and we actually did an Instagram live with him like about a year ago to kind of just talk about all the kind of complexities around holding both like your faith, if it's something that you actively practice, and also these core pieces of kind of who you are, and how to combine those two in a way that feels affirming. And one thing too I would say about that is that I think for a lot of young people, their faith spaces can be super, super important and a place of support. And oftentimes when youth come to a place of like figuring out their gender or figuring out their sexual orientation, they can like lose this really important community to them.
Right.
And so there's tons of like folks even on Instagram that are doing stuff around like queerness and faith. And I think the more you can tap into that community, it's super helpful because you can still kind of like hold this important faith piece and also all these other identities that are important.
So we have a question about what do you think about gender creative parenting, not assigning a gender to a baby and using they them pronouns? And then I second the gender creative parenting question. My fiance is currently doing their thesis on this, and we plan to raise our future child this way. Awesome. So I think it's great. I mean, I also think that like there's so many different ways to parent, and there's so many, I think I've heard like two arguments. Like one is absolutely do that and use they them until the child tells you. And then I've also heard the flip side of like go with their sex assigned at birth, assume gender until they tell you otherwise. I don't really know, like I guess I don't know like studies on that, or like I'm not exactly sure like how that's affected kids one way or the other. But I will say that just being open to listening to your child is to me the most important part of like whenever they can communicate whatever they need to communicate to you, that you're like listening and that you're open to it and supportive.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that parenting piece comes down to like thinking about all the ways that we gender kids that are unnecessary, right? Like we don't have to like give a kid no gender and give them no like room to explore, but we can also kind of like create this way more open like image of like what all the options are and what that can look like, and really thinking about like how do the ways that we maybe gender kids like limit their potential versus really like inviting them to be as like creative and happy and safe and successful as we want them to be. And so I think any way that you're just giving young people more options and letting them explore on their own. And then I think the key piece is what you talked about of like really listening to your child. And you know, like I always think like I'm gonna be super challenged as a parent, because if my kid wants to do these super gendered things, I'm gonna be like, no, why do you want to do that? But like obviously ultimately we want to like support kids and whatever they want to do. So I think as long as the arguments I only hear on the flip side are just like if it kind of then becomes limiting in a different way where you're like not really wanting to support a kid and just choosing what they want to do because you have this idea in your head of what gender like neutral should be. But I think it's awesome to like give kids that opportunity to kind of explore and figure things out on their own.
Yeah. I guess like 2 points that I thought of as you were speaking were like, let them get like toys in any section and any color. Let them do clothing in the same way. Like that to me would be like what that would look like to me.
Yeah.
And then also just thinking about the ways in which we interact with like children based on gender. Like I'm just even thinking of like at the park when like a little boy wants to like jump off the slide and everyone's like, go, yeah. And then like a little girl wants to jump off the slide and everyone's like, oh my God, be careful. Oh, it's just like, why did that change? Because they're the same age. Like, I don't understand what has shifted.
Yeah. It's like, wild how quickly those things happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
Yeah, and I appreciate that comment of kind of touching on like gender neutral versus gender creative. And I think that piece of like unleashing like the potential in all kids is really thinking about like the gender creative side. And
absolutely.
How do we give kids like all options and then let them choose like what makes them feel happy and excited.
Totally.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love that there's like parents out there even thinking about these things and having conversations about these things.
So important.
It is super, super important. Other comments, other questions? Other resources that people wish they had that we can take notes on. I think that's like someone wanting to join. I think we're still working through our Instagram live like perfection.
Yeah.
Is there any other things on here we want to like mention? We have some lists of things as well. I feel like maybe this one of like there's the one other piece that we talk about a lot with youth, especially at our conference when we're in a room with like a bunch of young people who are gender expansive in some way, is like really honing in to them that like there's not one way to look trans, to look non-binary, to look gender expansive. And I think that's like such a hard message that we don't get in the media very much, and how important it is to just like allow young people who are exploring gender to be able to like pick their own path. And to not feel like their gender expression and how they look has to be a certain way because that's what they saw on social media or that's what they saw in a magazine
or in a movie or like
and I think also like a lot of those images tend to be like white, thin, small-bodied, able-bodied people. And we just know that that's like not the reflection of the world that we live in. And so I think that can be a really important piece for young people to hear, that like however they look, that doesn't change like their core feeling of their gender identity internally. And just if you're a person like holding space for young people, I think even just naming that for them can be really powerful.
I think also there's this idea like even within like gender expansiveness, this idea of like a binary and this idea that like femme has to be performed in a certain way. Like it doesn't.
Yeah.
Like and masculinity doesn't need to be tied to toxicity. Like that these things can just exist and you can call them femme or you can call them masc or you can call them neither, but that there is no right way to femme or there is no even right way to be, you know, a woman or a girl or a boy or any of it. Like there actually isn't a template.
Yeah. I love that. I always think about how, like, you know, when you're filling something out and you put one part in and the rest, like, auto-populates.
Yeah.
That, like, gender is, like, the complete opposite of that. That it should be, like, you get to check what you want.
Yeah.
Whether it fits in that or doesn't. And that there's no, like, equation that's going to perfectly work for each person.
Right.
I think the other piece you spoke to, too, is, like, taking these identity terms and making them and defining them for yourself. Right? So many of the identity terms that we use like already have these like really loaded concepts and definitions.
Totally.
And, like that you can use the word femme or masculine and really say like I identify this way because this is what it means to me. And I think that can be super important. And it can also be super important for parents who sometimes get overwhelmed by the amount of identity terms there are around gender. And just like simply asking your kid like, oh, so you told me you identify as non-binary, can you share with me like what that means to you? I think it can save parents a lot of stress.
Right. Well, and also then, like, going into spaces and, like, when I meet new folks, like, just because they also go by they, them pronouns doesn't mean that, like, we're experiencing life in the same way or, like, any of that, right? Like, and it doesn't make me less valid or them more valid or, like, any of that. I think it's a really, like, individual experience, and I think it's great that like we have the shared experience and we do have other people that are going by the same pronouns or might identify similarly, but that doesn't need to be in place for like us to exist in the ways that we do.
We sometimes use the example of like if you were in a room with like 10 other cisgender women who use she pronouns, you would have some collective shared experiences, but you're not necessarily going to be like, I completely identify with this person next to me. We've had the same life experiences, right? So like you can find those things that are like connections and then the pieces that are still very different. We had a question. Here. What are your opinions on gender markers on here right there. This one. What are your opinions on people changing their gender marker on the ID to non-binary now that's legal in California? I've heard both good and bad things.
So the only negative thing I've heard is that then if you're traveling internationally, or there's a situation where in which you are needing passport and ID and they conflict, that you might be triaged to basically go and be harassed by the TSA. That's the negative that I've heard. I think it's super rad that it's being offered. I think like many governmental things though, the cart was ahead of the horse in that they were like, okay, we're doing it. And then everyone was just like, okay, wait, but what does this mean? And like, what does this, like, how is this going to work with all these other systems that are absolutely not prepared for this? I think that they were just like not ready at when they rolled it out. So I think that it might take a couple years for like other systems to catch up and like have it be kind of an easier experience.
I think it's awesome that it's an option. I think the visibility to see that on an ID for like a young person or even an older person to see that and be like, that's a valid identity. It's so valid that it's like on an actual document. I think also not every non-binary person's going to want that on their ID doc. So like just not assuming that like because someone says they're non-binary, they for sure are going to want to access this piece of what they can change on their driver's license and that doesn't impact like the validity in that identity. I've also heard from some young people that like that can kind of out their gender identity having it on an ID, and that for some of them that might not feel like a safe thing if like a family member sees it, or maybe just someone in their community that they haven't talked to about their gender. So I think like if you're working with a young person, that's also something to keep in mind, is always just kind of like their access to safety and how out they are about their gender. And maybe it doesn't make sense for them to put it on an ID doc now, but in 5 years it might be different. So just kind of like leaving it open for...
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was also thinking about like, well, I wonder what that would be like if you're, for example, getting pulled over and showing that. Like, I myself, I identify as non-binary, but like I'm already black when you're pulling me over. Do I also really want this ID that says that I'm non-binary, so that you can like scoff at that? And like, what is that gonna like, is that gonna mean I'm gonna get a ticket instead of a warning? I don't know.
Just so, like the unpredictableness of what that can mean for different people. Yeah, but I think that's a great question. I also saw someone posted about resources on top surgery. This is like shockingly something we don't have a ton of resources on, even though it's something that we talk about like a lot of the time. It's also like a really big topic that we cover at our conference every year. So this probably won't help for the person who just posted, because it looks like you're having surgery in like 30 days. But one of our goals of this year is to have a lot more resources that are like patient perspectives, medical provider perspectives, a whole thing on insurance, because that can be super challenging. But if you do have questions, you can definitely email info@genderspectrum.org. And oftentimes what we do is we can like connect you with someone else who you can ask your questions to. I think it's super helpful to hear from people who've actually gone through whatever procedure you're thinking about, to really hear from them what it was like. Yeah.
I would even, as far as social media, there's so many folks like talking, almost blogging about their journey, but like through Instagram. So I would search some hashtags that are relevant to top surgery, because there's definitely going to be a lot of folks saying like, oh, like I wish that I had known this beforehand, or like, you know, it took me like a week and a half to recover and I thought I might be back to work sooner, or whatever it may be, all different things and things to consider, and things that you might want to buy, and like, you know.
And this person also wrote like it would be a great resource for people who don't necessarily have help from family. Like totally, I think like the medical piece is like there's like no accessible information, I think, and it can be really hard to ask the questions. The insurance piece is its own kind of like whole thing to navigate. But I would definitely encourage, like what Yara was saying, is like kind of just browsing through Instagram and different blogs, and then feel free to email us at info@genderspectrum.org, and we can definitely connect you with resources and providers.
My friend Mateo just commented, and they said that they're willing to answer some questions, so if you want to DM them.
I feel like we should just have this person on one of our lives at some point.
Oh, Mateo, Mateo is everything. I love him so much.
But I will say, if your insurance gets denied, often what the experience is that we hear is people continue to keep pushing over and over again, and eventually it will get approved. I know there's also sometimes challenges with folks who are under 18 and like the approval process for that too, but I'd say like the hardest thing is to feel like you're navigating that stuff on your own, so as much as possible get tapped in and connected, and we can definitely support with resources as well.
And that actually brings us to our final piece. So I'm not exactly sure how old folks are in this live, but we host both preteen and teen groups for youth. It's on a weekly basis, and right now we have a 6-week kind of cohort that's moving through, but you can honestly join at any time. We just call them cohorts just to organize them on our end. But really, you could show up at the first one and go to none of the other ones. You could show up to the last one. It doesn't matter. And
they're online, so you can join by video, audio, or chat. I think for a lot of youth, having that flexibility of like maybe just joining the first group and just using chat because you don't want to talk or have your video on. All the flexible ways you can participate can be super helpful. So we do those for preteens 11 and 12 and teens 13 to 19, and we also do a similar model for parents. So if you work with parents or you are a parent and you want more support, we have groups kind of like general groups for parents supporting a gender expansive young person. We also just announced that we're doing a group specifically for API parents who have API kids who are gender expansive. And all of that is on our website at genderspectrum.org/groups. It's kind of hard to find if you don't have the, the direct link.
I just want to say also in the groups, one of the youth the other day joined, and they had this like avatar. Oh. So the avatar was like mimicking like their like mannerisms and like facial expressions, and it was a baby Yoda, and I was just like so impressed.
I feel like, oh my gosh, the youth are so good also at like the multitasking of these calls. They can like chat and turn their video on and be like like screen sharing something all at the same time. But
we need them all here as interns.
Yeah.
Like they're next level.
Seriously. But that's a great space for kind of the things we were talking about earlier of like having a space to explore and just we have youth who come in and like use different pronouns each group to see which one feels better for them. Like it's a really low pressure environment and they can join from their house or any place that feels safe for them. Yeah. We've had youth join from like a park.
Oh, really? Yeah.
But yeah, definitely check those things out if you're looking for resources.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you all so much. We're going to do this every month, so if there's any topics you'd love covered or questions you have about resources, you can always DM us or send us an email at info. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you so much, y'all. We'll see you next time.
Oh my God. Are you sure you want to end?